Hello everyone, MasterZeon1001 here, and in this video I want to go over this latest update of HardOps, which is HardOps version 00987_3. And whenever you open the Hops button, more than likely it's going to tell you that your Hops is out of date, which is why it will show these buttons. Depending on the market of your purchase, whether it's Blendermarket, Artstation, or Gumroad, just clicking these icons will take you to your market where you can download the latest update on the fly without a whole lot of issue, as long as you're able to log into your sales page and account, of course. If you have issues with updating, clicking this one will take you to a page telling you all about how to update HardOps in Boxcutter. But the main focus of this update was the ability to improve Uniquify. With this object, you can see that it's actually built up of a quite interesting array of objects. It's like a radial system going in here, cut inside, and then cuts happening in a radial formation. And normally this is something that Uniquify would actually struggle with. And so if we go in here, we hover over it, we see there's a new option for shift clicking to duplicate in addition to Uniquify. And we see that now we're able to duplicate objects off and keep the associated objects that actually comprise it as well in a recursive formation, even better than before in the previous update. So this is something that the video today will be talking about just a little bit, but I just wanted to just kind of give a TLDR introduction, just talking about how you can update and also the big picture of what we're focusing on here today. So here I am in Blender 2.83 using an older version of HardOps and Boxcutter. If we press Q, we see that Array V2 is one of the first options you see in the Q menu. And if we hover over it, we see that there's not an option to add a new array, which means that if we click this, we'll add an array, and we can scroll the wheel in order to add additional segments to our array. But if we go back into it, we're still adjusting that previous array. And then if we want to add a new one, we could always press A, which is the way it was made to be used. However, most of our modals actually have the ability to press Ctrl in order to add a new one. For example, bevel or solidify. In this case, mirror doesn't, but even lattice does, even screw does, even weld supports Ctrl to add a new modifier. So in order to make it more consistent, in this version, if you press Q and we hover over array, we see that Ctrl will add a new array. So here I am just adding an array, and then I can go back to the option, Control click, and now I'm adding a second array. And so we see that now it's faster and easier than ever for users to add multiple arrays to a mesh if needed. So whenever you use array, you would just press Q, choose array, and then as you move the mouse, you can just move your object, of course, adjusting the array on the fly. The system that we're using right now just interprets the mouse to the array and has nothing to do with our position of our mouse or anything like that. It just has to do with us moving the mouse. However, there's always been a secondary mode called 3D, where if you press V, you see that now the object is at the cursor. And if I scroll the wheel, you see that instead of it being incremented into space, it's actually being added to in between, with the final result being where my cursor is. And this is an interesting way to array, and is something I've always wanted to put inside of Boxcutter at some point. But since it still is a work in progress, I feel that it should be perfected first before we begin trying to port such a system. I feel it can be simplified even more. However, whenever I'm using array, I will do something like go in Boxcutter, draw a box, shift to live, and then go into array and just press V in order to array on my mouse, and then I'll just roll in between just to kind of get an idea of what it's going to be like whenever this system is in Boxcutter. However, the hotkey of pressing V can be a little extra, So for that reason, we've made it where if you go under your opt-ins area, which is under the Hops button, and the star represents the opt-ins, which are the controversial options of HardOps. Under Array V2, there's now an option for you to quickly change it over to be 3D instead. So here we will just draw a quick box, shift it to live, and I'm just going to jump into array, and notice that it's already sticking to the cursor. However, I can press X to change the axis, roll the wheel in between, and quickly array this to the amount that I want. And then if I want to add even more, for example, a grid array, I can just press A, press X, roll the wheel, and I'm able to easily get a grid formation here using array without a whole lot of work. So with the toggle of 2D, 3D, you can now have it jump into 2D mode if needed, or 3D, which is personally my favorite way to use Array V2. This one, while being a little minor, was something that drove me crazy. So if you were to say draw a box in Boxcutter, press V and array, and set up your array as you would do inside of Boxcutter, and let's shift it to live, you would press Q and then go into Array V2 to modify it. Array would just go haywire and you'd get this undesirable result. So you would have to press X a couple of times in order to get it back under control. And this was just not an acceptable way to transition from Boxcutter into HardOps. So this was something we also sought to alleviate this particular update. So if we draw a box, press V and just create an array, hold shift to get it under control. We will just shift that to live, and now if I press Q and jump into array, we see that even though it jumps a little bit, now that we're in 3D, oh, and it actually jumped because of the 3D mode. So let's right click cancel, and we can go under the button and switch it to 2D. And if we go ahead and modify it, we see that everything sits perfectly still until you begin moving the mouse. However, when it comes to 3D, due to 3D being a different type of system for adjusting array, those sort of things will have to be taken into consideration. So if you have your mouse off somewhere crazy, then you may possibly get an undesirable result whenever it comes to modifying your array. So this is also something worth keeping in mind when you start changing your entry mode from 2D to 3D. But keep in mind that you can use array in 2D or 3D mode and just press V to change it on the fly if you need to change between the different types of behaviors. And then of course adding to a array is just pressing A and moving your mouse to begin moving that one and positioning it as well. This one was an odd little glitch, but was definitely one that I'm glad to see gone. So we'll just start off setting up a bevel, and then we'll control shift click bevel to add another bevel, but we'll press X to drop it as a half bevel since we can't see what it's doing to the mesh. And using Boxcutter, we're just going to create a cut, and we will add another bevel level and press X and drop it at half as well. And we'll just keep doing this until we are about 4 levels in. Of course, slap a weighted normal on it, slap another bevel level on it, and now we're getting quite low in those bevel levels, just working this mesh up. So normally if you had to go through and troubleshoot this mesh, you would just go into Everscroll and you would just scroll through your booleans to find the boolean you need in order to make adjustments to that particular boolean if you wanted to just access that particular boolean on the fly. Another option inside of HardOps we wanted to replace with the new Everscroll system is Modifier scroll. So if you click on this, it will bring you into basically Modifier scroll, which is also part of Everscroll, but we wanted it to also have its own exclusive button for people who are just seeking to quickly just get access to Modifier scroll on the fly. However, the thing about Modifier scroll is if I were to just say click and apply this particular operation and be done, if I were to press Q and we bring up bull scroll, which is whenever you just click Everscroll, we see that it brought up Modifier scroll again. And if we press Q and we look at the tooltip, we see that left mouse click activates booleans, but it's not working in this case. And so this is a rather undesirable result. And it was kind of strange to get around, because what would happen is you would get locked in this and you would need to press tab to get back to booleans, and then you're back inside bull scroll. But because you had to jump through all the states, you ended up resetting your mesh to a state that's inadequate for you to properly judge what's going on when you're bull scrolling. So enough going over it like that. What I'll do is scroll this back up to its maximum state, and we'll just press Ctrl C to copy this, minimize this version of Blender, and I will just delete this, press Ctrl V to paste this. And let's go ahead and just Control click manage to evict all the cutters. And now we have our object over in this new file as well. So what I want to do is go through Modifier scroll just like before, and we're just going to stop somewhere prematurely and just click. And now you'll see that whenever you go into Everscroll, it will no longer have that issue where you get stuck in a expanded version of Modifier Scroll. Modifier Scroll has its purposes, and it also has its purposes whenever it's expanded, but being locked into it is just something that was definitely not something we intended. So I'm glad to see that that issue has now been resolved. So Spherecast is located under Mesh Tools in the Cube menu, and its purpose is simply just turning cubes into spheres. Usually at this point I take advantage of Boxcutter's ability to turn on auto smooth, and I will just begin box cutting it and then jumping into array, and the shape will already be smooth and set up for me to proceed. However, this is kind of a lazy way to work, and we should have just smoothed the sphere out and made it look better to begin with. So if we minimize this version of Blender, we can now just go inside of HardOps, press Q, and under Mesh Tools, when we hit Spherecast, we see that the shape is now smooth. It's also given one additional subdiv level of 4, which results in a more smooth transition for this particular cube becoming a sphere. And here I'm just turning it into an inset, pressing T, pausing it, pressing Alt X in order to get an inset slice, and then clicking to apply. And so it's just a small cosmetic change, but Spherecast was just one of those things that I always felt could just look a little bit better with just it being smooth off the bat. And then I also found myself jumping it up to the subdiv level of 4 in a lot of previous content, so I just went ahead and had that taken care of for you in the defaults. So a popular question that we're asked is, how do you break an object away from another object? Like, for example, this object, if I try to move it, you see that I'm not able to do anything with it as far as translating it. And the easy answer is press Ctrl A, visual geometry to mesh, and that mesh is now its own man, and you can just move it away. And now this object is just dealing with this one via parenting, which we can deal with just Alt P, clear parent, keep transformation. And now this object is its own mesh, and this object is its own mesh. However, let's go back a few steps there. So let's say that we wanted to move this away, but we wanted to keep the unique dynamic modifiers that comprise this thing. In fact, let's say that we wanted to adjust the thickness of this to actually be a little bit thinner than what we're looking at. So ideally you would just go into Everscroll, you would scroll back for your boolean that's doing the solidification cut here, and you would just adjust the solidification. But we see that by adjusting the thickness of just the plate, we're also adjusting the thickness of this area. So we're not able to adjust just the plate individually, and that's where Uniquify comes in. So by going under operations, there's an option called Uniquify that will basically make the cutters unique. And now whenever we recall this cutter through Everscroll and we solidify it to adjust its thickness, we're actually adjusting only the thickness of this particular mesh, because all the cutters have now been given unique instances for this particular mesh, allowing us to basically move this thing around as we please. However, it looks like there's probably another mesh that is contained within, just an intersect, which will probably need to be late parented. But in any case, this object is now free, and we're also in the previous version of HardOps before we began dealing with recursive support with Uniquify. So this is just kind of the foundation of what it does. However, if we were to jump over here, we select this shape and we choose Uniquify in the latest version, we can now go through, recall this, adjust the solidification, and move this out of the way. And we see that everything recursively down the chain has been connected to it. And that's where the recursion part of Uniquify expanded support comes in. The next thing I want to show is that, let's say I were looking at this from top view and I drew a box and we shifted it to live, but while looking at it from the front, we chose to control click radial array and pressed X a couple of times to radial array this. Well, let's say we wanted to make a duplicate of this shape and we wanted to Uniquify that. Well, if we move it, we see that we don't get the radial array with this object. We do get the cutters that are associated, but we don't get the empty, which is actually another element that's part of the radial array that has to be taken into consideration. So we'll just cancel that and jump back over to the other version of Blender, where we're using the most current version of HardOps _3, and we will just shift this to live, and we'll perform that exact same operation using radial array. And here the stage is set. So let's go under the Q menu and we'll hover over Uniquify, and we see that we don't even have to press Ctrl D and then right click cancel and be in that intermediate state. We can now actually just hold Shift and click this option, and just pressing Y or X, we can just move this object over. And now we have a dynamic, unique version of this object that still has all of its modifiers live. Like I said, we could duplicate and move this around all day destructively without issue, but if you wanted to keep the associated modifiers, that's where the system comes into play. And a lot of work has went into making this the best version of itself, and I look forward to the issues that will be reported even after this update. But a lot has been taken into consideration with making this grab the objects, the modifiers of objects, fill in those and replace them with the object that we're actually creating in this particular instance. So hopefully it'll come in handier and handier as you use it on more interesting shapes. But I definitely sent it through a plethora of test cases. In fact, the final test case that I had was this gun, and the way that I tested it was I just grabbed all the pieces. Some of them are built with boolean, some of them are just regular meshes, and we just go under operations and we shift click Uniquify and we move it over on the X, and we see that we now have this version that is still non-destructive and dynamic. However, we also have this version that is also non-destructive and dynamic and still has all the associated cutters that are related to it. So if we press Alt H and we look at, let's see, my local mode. Oh, seems the placement got a little strange. So let's say that we wanted to straighten this out. Actually, placement got really strange here. Did not mean to put this in the main collection. Sorry about that. There we go. And so now if we Alt H and we look at both of these, we see that we have unique cutters for all these instances in the cases in which they're required. So we're even able to uniquify complex selections of objects in addition to just singular objects, which is what its first intended purpose was. So good on you who reported issues with it and brought it to this very state that we're looking at today. So whenever you perform an operation like sharpen, the edges are automatically marked via the selection that's in the ctrl tilde area of sharp options. As we see here, by default, crease, bevel weight, sharp are marked by default without seam being on by default. However, let's go in and turn off everything except for crease. And this also applies to edit mode, meaning I can select an edge and just mark it. I can select another edge and just mark it. I can select a couple of edges and mark them. And let's put a subdivision modifier on here, and we can actually see the result as we make modifications to the mesh. Here we see that even though I marked these edges, the subdivision result did an update. And this is compared to us just pressing Shift E and it actually updating in real time as we add creasing amounts to this mesh just through Blender's own creasing system. So this is reflective of a problem happening within HardOps, and this was something that we did want to resolve this update. So if we press Ctrl tilde, we can go in here and we'll just turn off seam, sharp, and bevel weight, leave on only crease, and let's just put a subdivision modifier on here. We'll put a level 3 just via Ctrl 3, and we'll just select a few edges and mark them, and we see that very quickly we're able to crisp and contour these edges in order to get this to the form that we want without a whole lot of issues. So it was a small issue, but I'm thankful for the users that pointed it out, and I'm happy to announce that it's finally been resolved. So select tool is located as part of mark. If you hover over mark, you can see that shift clicking it will jump you into something called a multi-tool. And by using this, we are able to just press X to change our tool on the fly and use something like knife, which knife comes in handy whenever you're needing to perform cuts. However, if you need to actually see the results of this on your actual geometry, you can press Shift D and that will turn on Polygon Debug, where now the mesh will be updated on the fly with an overlaid shader to let you know exactly how you're doing as far as topological solving on your mesh surface. So I'll just continue cutting, and we can see it actually updating in real time, showing the affected changes as they take hold via the knife tool. And we'll just perform a couple of cuts, just getting the surface together, maybe connect it here, and we'll grab this one and connect it here, solving that area. And we'll just press spacebar and take a look at why this area is an N-con. So it appears there's a near miss there. We can press M, merge at last. So even though I'm outside of selection tool, we still see that Polygon debug mode is on, where I can then press Q and go under mesh tools and choose selection options and turn it off in the event that I no longer need Polygon debug displaying. So just letting you know that if you're the type of person to use select tool, which also can be accessed from object mode by shift clicking on reset axis align select, you can just go in and just look at your topology and begin making changes, or even select and control scroll to wheel, which is what this tool was born for. Or you can press shift D and turn on the ability to see the topology via the Polygon debug. In closing, I just want to say that I'm immensely proud of the work that has gone into it and the participation of all the team members involved. It's through everyone's tireless efforts that Hops continues to shine. I know it probably seems like we put out quite a few updates, but it's really to ensure that this product is always at its best, because it could definitely be worse. There's so many known issues out there and things that we're unable to change because of shortcomings on either our side or Blender, or just the inability to change things that we wish we could, that I'm pretty obsessed with the ability to change the things that we can in order to make sure that the product is at its best. Because having people report bugs and saying that their projects are being stopped by this issue or that issue is definitely not something that we ever like to hear about. So these issues are always things that are taken seriously. So I'm proud of all the work that's gone into this update, and I look forward to what future work we'll be bringing forth to you guys. So I hope that y'all enjoyed this video, and I look forward to seeing what y'all are able to pull off with the latest hops.